Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny. Sometimes Colorado. Third time today. Got Logan on the mic, and we're just going to get through it. This is the Midnight Special, November 16th, 2023. Guys, ready? Let's go. Okay. First step is we're going to go ahead and share the screen. Wow! There we go. Okay. So, a lot of community questions about Midnight. A lot of people interested in Midnight. A lot of stuff floating online. I did a whiteboard publicly with my 30-minute keynote. We didn't really have a lot more time for that keynote, unfortunately, or else I would have gone into a lot of detail. So we just kind of left it for this. And I said, I owe you guys a whiteboard. Been terribly ill for the past 2 weeks, but we've pushed through, and that's okay because we got Excalibur and Obsidian. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, Midnight notes. How about that? All right. So in the beginning, there was just Cardano's asset and settlement layer. Okay. And what I'll do is I'm going to shut this notepad down so we have a bigger screen here. So in the beginning, we just had the asset and settlement layer of Cardano. And basically what this layer was all about was that you have Cardano assets and settlement. There we go. Stroke width, all that stuff. And we'll zoom out just a little bit. There we go. Assets and settlement. You have things like Cardano native assets. You have ADA. You have the extended UTXO model. You have Plutus. You have Ouroboros. And other artifacts that exist there. And it's a really technological marvel when you look at what we've constructed from Byron to Voltaire. On-chain governance, the Cardano network stack, liquid non-custodial staking. There are thousands of innovations that live here, and there's a design philosophy that lives here that's very powerful. And that design philosophy, really, the goal is to gradually upgrade this system so that you really make it the best place to issue assets and the best place for fast settlement. So there are programs like Ouroboros Laos. There are programs like Babel fees. There are huge improvements that have been made to Plutus and the family of languages that compile into it, like Aiken, for example, which is a community project. And refinements and iterations to the extended UTXO model, and obviously a lot of discussion around improving the native asset standards, including new standards like security tokens, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is wrapped up with best-in-class on-chain governance. And so this is this concept of SIP 1694 and MVG. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but if you're a dApp developer and you want to write a great dApp, so let's just, expand one of these things right here. And we'll put a little background inside that thing. Maybe a little happy blue. There we go. And we'll fill it like a shade. There we go. So let's say you're a dApp developer and you're creating a nice little dApp. Okay. Well, your dApp is going to likely consume a large collection of different things. So you're going to have some off-chain stuff. You're going to have perhaps, an Oracle, maybe like Chainlink. Okay. And then obviously you're going to do some stuff on Cardano. Maybe you are a Cardano native asset. Maybe you're using Marlowe to do your settlement and do all your financial logic. Okay. So all of your ownership stuff is kind of managed there. And maybe you connect your off-chain and on-chain stuff with Plutus. Now, what happens when all of a sudden you say, hey, I want to add a regulation layer to that dApp? Okay, well, right now, that would probably be another off-chain provider. Maybe that's like Accurate or, or maybe VeriSign or something like that. Does your KYC and AML, a whole bunch of options there. Well, the whole concept of the Cardano service layer in a nutshell is to say, well, hang on a second here. We want our infrastructure over time to gradually decentralize. And so wouldn't it be cool if we allowed people to build service layers inside the system? Okay. So these service layers are basically decentralized infrastructure. So they have some characteristics about them. They are, for all intents and purposes, their own blockchain. They have their own tokenomics. They have their own transaction logic. They're going to have their own network logic. And they're going to have their own consensus logic. And there's going to be some form of a connecting tissue that goes between these networks and talk to each other. Okay. And usually we call that some form of a bridge. Now, the problem with this idea is that what it effectively does is it leads to a very difficult to manage and fragmented ecosystem. So back in 2016, when I wrote Why Cardano, I introduced this concept of a computation layer, and I've kind of renamed it a little bit. And I'm starting to call these things the Cardano service layer, because I think of like microservices or service-oriented architecture, and I say, well, at the end of the day, this is what we care about, is the dApp. And what I want to do is take as much of this off-chain centralized stuff, and what I want to do is put Cardano at the center of the dApp. Okay. Cardano at center. And say, okay, if your dApp has an asset, make it a Cardano native asset. Write all your financial logic in a domain-specific language like Marlowe. Do some connecting tissue in Plutus, and all your off-chain stuff. What I'd like to see happen is an ecosystem of service chains form. And those chains basically provide different views or contexts, different capabilities. And every single one of them has different logic behind it. Excuse me. Every single one of those service layers has different logic behind it, meaning they have different tokenomics, different transaction, different network and consensus logic. But what we can do is bundle this in just the right way where they actually have a common ancestor. They have a common set of rules so that basically they're in partnership with Cardano. And we'll get into specifics with Midnight. Okay, common rules. Okay, so a common ancestor, common, and those rules basically say, okay, is it a layer 2 or is it a sidechain? Well, what if we say it's both? Meaning that it can have its own security mechanism. Okay, some part of the network can secure itself internally. And that'll be connected in some way to the logic of the blockchain. And I'll give you guys 2 examples on that. But at the same time, it borrows security from the Cardano chain via quorum sampling of the SPOs. So the SPOs can go and run a supernode, and they actually can keep part of that chain secure. And then the other thing, if these are service layers, let's actually have a common set of rules in terms of the tokenomics. So kind of on the consensus side, you want some commonality. We call that commonality Minotaur. But basically the idea is that when you're setting up your partner chain, you start from a default where the Cardano network has the option to secure that chain. So it almost behaves kind of like a layer 2. But then you also can add on additional layers of security that are relevant to the logic of your system to connect your system to other systems, maybe like Ethereum, maybe like Bitcoin, or maybe it's an internal thing, like you're having your own proof of work or something inside the system because it's useful for your context. But you can kind of layer these things together and you can split up your tokenomics accordingly. And then what you do is you follow a dual token model. So the dual token model basically says that you issue your deflationary asset on Cardano as a Cardano native asset. Okay. So you issue a token like that. And this kind of represents the control, the governance, the ownership of the system. And then what you do is you say, okay, and ideally, deflationary monetary policy makes sense there. And then you have another token that lives in the service layer token. And that is effectively the fuel token of the system. And that can follow a different monetary policy, especially to give you predictable pricing. And ideally, what you'd like to happen is that the token that lives on Cardano has some mechanism to generate, with some degree of regularity, the fuel. So that's how you connect those two. So what you can do is what Cardano really does provide is a mechanism to sort out a distribution of the service ownership and resource. So you get a kind of a common distribution from Cardano, regardless of the particular service that you're looking at. So, this could be, like World Mobile Token, for example, if they wanted to run World Mobile Chain as a partner chain, and this could be like an AI chain or something like that, if they want to go down that road. And you could have a dozen of these things. And you think, okay, an AI chain looks like ChatGPT. Every time we query it, it is a transaction. You pay a predictable fee for that transaction. So there's a token that would live here, and that's a fuel token. You want bandwidth, there's a token that lives here. And then you'd have a Cardano native asset, and that native asset acts as a regulating function to basically create that fuel with some degree of regularity. That's how you connect those two things together. If they're one token and they're both connected together, the deflationary nature of the system is at odds with the variable monetary policy that you need to have with the fiat system. So it's good to actually separate them in some way. And this is kind of the thing that we've been exploring on the Midnight side. So you have something that lives on the asset and settlement layer. You have something that lives in the service layer. And then basically one generates the other. Security comes from here, and then you parameterize Minotaur to basically get security from either just that one source or multiple sources. When transactions happen and blocks are made, it generates that ownership token, this thing here, and that gets paid to the ADA holders and the stake pool operators through the delegation process. Now, if you're a stake pool holder, a stake pool operator at SPO, in practice, you'd be running a supernode. And there's some examples of this, like Firefly is kind of a supernode maintained by Hyperledger. And that supernode basically gives you the ability to plug in through a containerization multiple chain structures, multiple chains. Okay. And the idea of having a common framework, a common ancestor, is there's a uniform process for the stake pool operator to have their Cardano container, and then they'll have their Cardano service layer 1, Cardano service layer 2, service layer, and each of those service layers effectively are things that they can maintain, and they just basically drag and drop and pick them. So we're kind of looking at this supernode concept in parallel, and one of the things that we've been exploring is this idea of log space mining. We wrote a paper on this a few years back in the proof of work space, and now we're trying to explore it from the Minotaur perspective of how to apply a concept of log space mining so that you, as a SPO, do not have to maintain a full node, but rather you have a lighter than full node, so a lighter node for the side chains that you're maintaining, the partner chains that you're maintaining. So you kind of just have the tip of it and maintain the state and the transitions of the system. And then these are all containers effectively. So as a delegator, the idealized thing is the metadata of the stake pool certificate. You'd be able to see effectively which pools are supporting partner chains and which chains are supporting. And then we try to make that a lightweight experience for those stake pool operators for some sort of supernode architecture. And again, Firefly is a good reference for how that would be done. For each one that they're supporting, what would happen is as they make blocks and transactions are done, rewards are paid, and those rewards basically flow through. Okay, so that's how you create an incentive layer for ADA holders, and you also create an incentive layer for SPOs, basically to maintain these services. Minotaur gives you the ability to kind of decide how your security is going to come together, and then you can build other bridges here. Now, the dual token model basically separates the ownership, governance, and control of the system and field generation of the system from the actual fuel of the system. The fuel will live on the service layer, and the native asset will be the ownership of the network here on Cardano. That's kind of the rough idea of how this all comes together. And then when you're a dApp provider, then what you do is you say, oh, okay, I want to use Midnight now for all of my KYC ML and my data protection privacy stuff. And then there's this question of, well, what currency do I pay in, ADA or Dust? And the reality is it actually doesn't matter. And this is why Babel fees was developed. The whole concept of Babel fees basically means that the user of the dApp basically pays in the currency that they have. So if they have ADA, they pay in ADA. If they have Dust, they pay in Dust. And then there's mechanisms under the hood that effectively sort out how that settlement consumption is going to work. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, under the hood, it's all ADA, but Babel fees sorts out the settlement of these things. So more of these native assets on the system create more demand overall for ADA as kind of the fuel of Cardano. So this is a recognition of some facts that we have to contend with in a broad ecosystem of cryptocurrencies. So the first thing you really have to accept is that the world is multi-chain. Okay, no matter how much we want to be Cardano maxis, the thing is that this was built to be a tank. Ouroboros is absolutely extraordinary. Plutus is great. Extending UTXO is great. We're not going anywhere. And with Laos and other things, we're going to make it really fast and input endorsers agenda. And there's a great roadmap here to make Cardano best in class. And there's a whole bunch of great infrastructure here. But just because you have all that infrastructure, what happens when you need privacy, data protection, identity? What happens when you need an AI component? What happens when you need decentralized network components? What happens when you want to get rid of Infura and Alchemy and you want to have a decentralized host? So basically a something like a D-Alchemy, where you're running basically, instead of with a normal web host, you're running completely in a Web3 context. And so that infrastructure is no longer there. Does it make sense to overload the Cardano chain with all these features? And in many cases, they're very contradictory to each other. Here, you're going to have to admit, for example, a mutable world, because you're paying rent to utilize some space. And when you stop paying it, it may stop storing that. This is a blockchain. It never throws anything away. So the reason you need a service layer is you need the ability for services to come and go. And you also need the ability for services to have different design philosophies. For example, having all this really sophisticated snark technology is awesome for a lot of use cases. But if your goal here is a super high performance ledger that's public by default with high liquidity, it doesn't make a lot of sense to conflate these two. So the point of a service layer is you don't have to give that up. You have a coherent, through a Supernode notion, management model where your stake pool operators can comfortably manage many, many service layers at the same time. And that's the point of log space mining. And each of those service layers is kind of like a service-oriented architecture where a dApp can call them as needed, and they kind of pay in the currency that they care about. And at the end of the day, Babel Fees just kind of settles all of that. And the dual token model means that you can separate the ownership, governance, control of the system from the underlying fuel. So you can start getting predictable prices. At the end of the day, this has to be competitive with Amazon. This has to be competitive with OpenAI. This has to be competitive with T-Mobile. This has to be competitive with VeriSign and a lot of the services that basically provide privacy services. Okay. And that's not going to be competitive when every day the price changes by 600% based upon market conditions. So we thought a lot about how to put these types of things together. And we live in a multi-chain world. We also live in a world where interoperability is king. Okay. You have to have an interoperability strategy. So the reality is Ethereum's not going to go away and Bitcoin is not going to go away. And so you need some sort of mechanism of mechanisms to bridge and make other networks partner and care about your system. Okay. You need some sort of way of doing that. And that's effectively what we came up with this concept of a service layer model, as you're saying, oh, okay, well, it's all right for these guys to do their thing. They have great ecosystems. They have millions of people and they have dApp developers and they're thinking about stuff. And the reality is that those dApp developers are potentially customers of Cardano. The problem is that right now, the dApps that live in this ecosystem and the dApps that live here, they can't talk to the things in Cardano. By having a service layer that has a lot of hooks for interoperability, what that effectively allows you to do is have a dApp, instead of just being a Cardano native dApp, it could be written in Solidity here on Ethereum, but then call a midnight service or call our AI chain or call our decentralized network or whatever the heck we got here, especially here with this decentralized hosting. That's something that is kind of a holy grail, and it's a very fragile point overall in the Ethereum ecosystem. So if you care about interoperability as one of the truths, you have to have some sort of strategy for how are all these things going to fit together. A big part of the Cardano sidechain agenda is that common ancestor, that common set of rules, is this idea of trustless bridging. It's another component. The first generation, a little kludgy, but eventually what you want to do is use recursive proofs to basically give yourself a high degree of assurance for supported chains that when you see a transaction go back and forth, as long as you know some baseline things about these chains, which is pretty easy to inject into the system in a trustless way, that's actually accurate. The rollup community has been talking about this a lot. The recursive snark community has been talking about this a lot. And we as an ecosystem are starting to move in this direction of building bridging that is semi-trustless or trustless in general. So interoperability relies on this. So multi-chain, interoperable. And the other thing is, this is the biggest one and the most important, legacy friendly. You need to have the capacity and ability to bring many, many users on board from the systems that have billions of people. So the Microsofts of the world, the Facebooks of the world, and the others. So that's where we invented concepts like RVTP and this idea of hybrid systems. So when you run a service layer, That service layer does not have to be fully decentralized. Like you can imagine a government agency, for example, a nation state that has a voting system as an example application. Excuse me. Okay, so that voting system. Well, as much as we'd like to inspire, say, hey, cryptocurrencies are great and blockchain's amazing, it's really hard to get government officials to fully trust their voting system of their nation state totally to a blockchain. So they're going to want to have some sort of control. And the point of things like Minotaur and the service layer idea is that you can have a dual check system. So the SPOs can run one part of the system, and then you can have a permissioned BFT run the other part of the system with the government basically running a permission BFT component. So they feel comfortable because they have a say. So it looks almost like a permission chain, but then actually there's an open component inside of it. So that hybridization is extremely important. And legacy requires that. They require the ability to seamlessly flow between public data and private data, consortium control or centralized control, and decentralization. And the point of the service layer is to give you the ability to control both sides. So there's a lot of questions that come here. Like, for example, who gets to have a service layer? Well, what we want to do is have a democratic process where anybody can try to instantiate one, but then you create a marketplace where the SPOs basically have to decide whether they're going to support it or not. So you have to build up a base of support. And then if they're running and maintaining that node, people actually using it works well. The dual token model, there's a lot of tokenomics that have to be figured out. And we have some great ideas for Midnight as a case study. And we think what will happen is people will copy those tokenomics when they build their own service layers. Then some compatibility infrastructure has to be built for these dApps to be able to seamlessly talk to multiple services and move state between multiple services. Like, for example, I can imagine a world where Alchemy or Infura is combined with the Cardano blockchain, combined with the Midnight blockchain, and all three of them work together basically to call one thing. So, and then you'll have multiple payments. Babel fees can sort that out, or DEXs can sort that out, and it just becomes something that works under the hood, and people basically just pay in the things that they care about. Now, why is this important? Like, imagine a legacy-friendly application. So I can think of nothing more legacy-friendly than an electronic health record system, an EHR. And here's a real-life use case. So you have this clinic, you have another clinic, and let's say you have a third clinic. And from a collective incentive, you want clinic 1, 2, and 3 to share their electronic medical records with each other, because maybe they do different services and they have to refer patients, so there's demographic information. So you could imagine that an EHR plus Midnight would be able to do the following. They can ask questions of each other, queries, and those queries are private. So basically, the clinics will get answers, but they won't get any of the underlying personally identifiable information of the patients. You can also allow other parties. So you think about regulation in a broader sense. So maybe a government health agency, and they can ask questions and send queries through and get all those answers, but no individual clinic has to consolidate their medical records. So this is a great example of kind of a hybrid application where there's kind of a centralized component or federated component because each clinic is hosting its own EHR, but then there's connecting tissue, and that connecting tissue is a Midnight application. Excuse me. And maybe eventually they want to, instead of hosting it themselves, use a cloud provider, but then use a decentralized infrastructure to host the medical information, as opposed to using a database, in the sky, like Amazon or something like that. Okay, and then maybe they want to tokenize all of this, and then they go ahead and deploy a Cardano native asset to tokenize all of that and do all the financial transactions. Why? because Cardano is reliable, it has liquidity, it's listed on over 200 exchanges, there's a very strong DeFi ecosystem, and it makes sense to do that. So when you talk about these dApps, that's an example of a very well-defined use case that everybody acknowledges is a super important thing. You need it for public health, you need it for billing purposes, you need it for medical research, you need it for epidemiology, all kinds of stuff. It's a very important thing. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, and it's a goddamn nightmare in practice in the United States to actually get these types of things resolved. And by adding decentralized infrastructure, you actually really start chipping away at it. But then you can hybridize that, and that's what we kind of mean when we say legacy friendliness. And then interoperability, there may exist other solutions or really cool and interesting ideas that are floating around the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem. And we do live in a multi-chain world. So, excuse me, really pushing through here, guys. So the point of Midnight and more broadly, the partner chain framework is to try to sort all these different things out. In simple terms, you have two tokens. You have something that represents your ownership, your governance, your control. You have something that represents your feel. They follow different monetary policies. One is the native spending asset of that chain. It can be consumed on demand. It can be reallocated to the stake pool operators as transaction fees. There's variable monetary policies depending upon the nature of the chain. They can have their own treasury systems. And then it exists as a Cardano native asset, just like any of these dApps and DeFi do. And then when you think about the dApp, you stop thinking about the dApp on Cardano, and you start thinking about the dApp consuming a collection of different services, and that you talk about these services basically as containers that live in a supernode. And those services effectively allow you to build out decentralized infrastructure for your dApps. So over time, more and more things enter the Web3 world. So there's a lot to do. The trustless bridging has to be done. The log space mining concept, supernode concept has to be done. There's a great starting point with Substrate as a builder kit for a lot of these things, but there's about 190, 200,000 lines of code that have to be added. So it's inaccurate to say it's a Substrate clone. It's a good starting point, but there's an enormous amount of changes, modifications, adding, and enhancements that need to be made to make this model work, especially with Minotaur. Excuse me. And Minotaur is the kind of the skeleton key that ties all of this together. So there's a broader question like, is this good for Cardano? And I guess it's a philosophical question. That's kind of a good way to close it out. If you want Cardano to be alone as an island, and all it is this beautiful place for people to come and visit, then it doesn't really make any sense to invite the concept of service layers. But the problem is an island can't be everything to everyone. We can't have divergent visions on your transaction network and consensus logic. You can't have different storage and data availability notions. You can't have different settlement times. You can't have all these things. No matter how well we've designed this, that's like saying an island has everything. If you're Mykonos, you're going to have a beautiful island and a beautiful experience, but you're not Hawaii. And Mykonos doesn't wake up and say, boy, I can't wait to be Hawaii. And Hawaii doesn't wake up and say, I can't wait to be Mykonos. They're their own things, and they have their own natural beauty about them. Well, what we have to do if we want to win the third generation is win interoperability and admit we live in a multi-chain world, and there exist legacy services that trillions of dollars are based in, and they're not going to go away. The point of the partner chain's notion is to create a service layer for Cardano that allows us to plug in enhancements and upgrades. It's almost like Mega Man, if you guys remember that game back in the day, Mega Man X. I was a big fan of that. And they had those capsules. And those capsules allowed you to upgrade Mega Man. You get a dash and a X-Buster upgrade and like a helmet that could find things and all kinds of cool stuff. Well, that's effectively what we're doing with the service layer. We're plugging something in, and once we plug it in, it means every Cardano dApp now has the ability to call upon this and get something out of it. At the end of the day, this brings users in because Suddenly, we now have the ability to call the broader legacy and the broader crypto ecosystem, and it brings a lot of visitors to the Cardano island. So it's like opening an airport, it's like opening up a cruise line, and all these people come and visit. That's the world I want to live in. And it doesn't stop the evolution and development of Cardano any more so than it stops us building up our island. Laos will come, and the third generation is still unwon and it's still under construction. When we say it's fourth generation, what we're really doing is it's saying the hybridization of the legacy and the DeFi, the private and the public, the one consensus with another consensus. We're talking about that mixture of all of these things. And the fourth generation is really about replicating the services bootstrapped from the chain. So they're bootstrapped decentralized, but they can flirt with and talk to many different things, which is why a lot of people are chasing this Cosmos and Polkadot. And there's dozens of these microservice blockchains. And if you really look at the well-funded things like the eigenlayers or the layer zero, there's clearly people who actually understand this who are in the know. And the advantage we have is that we've been thinking about it for about 5 years, and we have all the pieces here. And with Midnight, what we're doing is we're putting those pieces together as a case study to show how to do this. And what will happen is there'll be a nice distribution that will bring the broader cryptocurrency ecosystem in. And for the most part, many people in Bitcoin who have never really heard or cared about Cardano now actually have something to connect to, and Ethereum who have kind of written us off. Now we'll take a second look, and we'll take a second look through our service layer. They don't care it's running on Cardano. They don't care it's secured by Cardano. It just basically creates that nice flow through for it. So I hope this gives you guys a better sense of where things are at. Uh, Applications, of course, will run solely on Midnight or hybridize, run on Cardano, either or. So, and oftentimes people will call applications and then it'll be like a larger service oriented application of applications model. So I could imagine, for example, a bunch of regulation and compliance applications that are built that run on Midnight that are called through APIs by Cardano applications, and they pay a dust fee to run that. And dust living here, and then another asset basically being the ownership token of Midnight here. I can imagine a world like that. And I can also imagine a world where Midnight applications call a lot of Cardano applications. For example, if there's lots of assets that are floating here that are ephemeral, need liquidity, then maybe there's a high liquidity DEX that lives on Cardano. But there's going to be that cross pollination that lives there. And there's going to be a case where an Ethereum app calls Midnight, which then in case calls Cardano. And so indirectly, Ethereum creates demand for Cardano. There are about 76 million users here. There's about 35 million users here, about 3 million users here. We build bridges. These 100 plus million users become potentially customers here. That's the power of opening an airport for your island. There are residents and then there's tourists. And you know what? That tourism can be quite valuable for our application space, especially if we have the best service layer. And this is the best place to deploy new services in the broader ecosystem. I can imagine a chain link coming here. I can imagine the graph coming here. I can imagine a lot of these service layers coming here and realizing this is the best place to do it because it has the best mixture of capabilities and it's the fastest to market for everybody. But we don't compromise on the high assurance core of who we are. So I hope that answers some of your questions. I see there's some things floating around on Twitter that are a little nutty, and I see a lot of things on Reddit that are a little nutty. People saying, "Oh, this means that we're abandoning Cardano. This means that this is going to be a parasitic load, and there's no benefit to Cardano." Let's be very clear here. If Cardano secures a network worth $10 billion, and then every time that network makes blocks, it's paid to ADA holders, how is that bad for the broader ecosystem? I think it's more of just fear of the unknown, and I think it's more of this is a complicated concept. And we say again and again, there's governance, there's scalability, and there's interoperability. And governance, it's a big fight, and everybody's talking about it. Can't even do a ballot vote without some drama. It is what it is. It's okay. It's a controversial thing. And SIP 1694 is helping push us in that direction. When you talk about scalability, we have input endorsers, and that's great, but other people even have their own ideas on how to achieve scalability, and they are certainly very passionate about it. But interoperability, it really is a game of asking, what are we being interoperable about? When you write a dApp, you are not writing a dApp to be beholden to Vitalik Buterin's design decisions on Ethereum, or the Solana developers' design decisions, or the Algorand developers' design decisions, or my design decisions, or, pick your favorite person. You're not doing that. You're writing a piece of infrastructure that you ideally, I would hope, want to be as decentralized as possible with predictable pricing and provide a real use case to a group of people. Okay, or else this is all a scam. The whole industry is a scam if that's not the case. If it's just tokens and speculation, what are we doing? If we're really about replacing the legacy world with a world with principles, when you write something, it's infrastructure, which means you're going to call services from many different places. And the idea is they have to be reliable, they have to be predictable, and they always have to be competitive. And the point of what we're pushing with this service layer model is this idea that we become one of the best places for those upgrades. And Midnight is a case study for how to do that, the data confidentiality side. And it adds all these amazing things to our ecosystem. Some that are an overlap, some that are completely new and incompatible with the way that Cardano does things on the native ledger. And the point is, by adding them together, now as a dApp developer, you have both at your disposal. You're not always going to use it, just like a carpenter has a bunch of tools. And if you're building a chair, you need different tools than if you're building a cabinet or doing finishing work versus framing, for example. Okay. But the point is, you have that set of tools and you know where and when and how to use those tools to be able to deliver a great experience to your customer. So interoperability means you're a multi-chain world. There's legacy stuff you have to worry about. And then obviously you have to build bridges with people. And I want tourists on our island. I want people to come and visit so that when people do things on Ethereum, maybe just maybe they call a service that lives in our layer and that indirectly benefits our ecosystem. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to build. The development work on Cardano hasn't slowed down. It's sped up. The roadmap of Cardano continues to move forward. No one has been pulled or reassigned to Midnight from Cardano. They're using different technologies and different languages and different engineers. Almost all those engineers actually come from the Polkadot ecosystem, and they work with us. And we've been staffing up more people on the Cardano side. And this actually adds a lot of new crazy great capabilities to the Cardano base layer. BLS support, fast settlement through Ouroboros Paris, enhancements to the Bluetooth language in general, more use of zero knowledge and recursive structures for the trustless bridges, which are useful for all Cardano dApps, speeding up the development work of Mithril, enhancing the stake pool experience. These are all some direct benefits of adding a partner chain framework into the Cardano ecosystem. In addition to the thousands of developers, if not tens of thousands, it brings to the Cardano ecosystem, because now we're a multi-model approach with many different languages and approaches. Better PubSub infrastructure is another example of things that we bring. And it gives us the ability to decentralize faster than other people. Okay, so we have to really think holistically about this stuff, and we have to take a step back and not allow the drama of the moment or the passions of the moment to overcome us, and realize that these are very complicated systems. They have a lot of moving pieces about them, and ultimately there is no right solution for everything. Just like there's no universal tool for carpentry. Some are more useful than others, but every tool has its place and purpose. Cardano's around. We've accomplished one of the most significant things you can accomplish as a top 10 cryptocurrency, in that we've created a root of trust. And that seldom goes away. It's a very strong thing. And there's a lot of value in that. And that's going to be enhanced and over time built upon like a great mountain. It's not going anywhere. And now what we can do is leverage that to provide much more capabilities, from bootstrapping to fast settlement to all kinds of things, to partner chains, and launch services that basically take that to the next level. As an ecosystem, excuse me, and as an ecosystem, give us the ability to offer a dApp developer a wide degree of tools to be able to build something. That's the vision. And if we pull that off, we will capture tens of millions of developers, and we will eclipse all the people in the industry, because they don't compete with us anymore. They just start using our stuff. They don't criticize us anymore. They're asking questions on how to connect and interoperate with our stuff. That's the point. We're building an airport on the island, and we're starting to get some tourists to come and buy our stuff and do some things. So I really hope that this gives you guys some clarity on some of the questions that have been floating around, and it gives people a better sense of why we do what we do. The CEO model is great. By having it on Barack and a subsidiary pursue this, it frees me up to think a lot more about Cardano and the broader ecosystem and the governance side of things, and have somebody go and build and focus exclusively on an amazing service and be able to get it market into a fast period of time and be accountable for making sure it's really high quality. And I can be a board member and kind of watch it. So that helps it from becoming a distraction. On the other hand, it becomes a very big value augmentation, because it can bring so many new people into the Cardano ecosystem who never gave us a fair shot for a variety of reasons, and gives us a second look, which is how you build a great ecosystem just in time for the next cycle. So I hope this gives you guys a better sense of what's going on, and I look forward to your comments and future videos. Cheers.